Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard program panel. Today we have a special program. We're going to be hearing from the most important people in the world: investors, consumers, clients. There are lots of different names we use for those people who receive the services of financial advisors. My name is Knut Rostad. I'm the president of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard. We are a not-for-profit that exists for the singular purpose of advancing fiduciary practices and conduct by those who give financial advice, period, end of sentence. Every September, we have a series of panels and programs to help investors, advisors, regulators remember why it's so important that the advice that's given is fiduciary advice. The Institute for the Fiduciary Standard does not per se take a position on which fee-only compensation method is best, because we see pluses and minuses in all of them. But here's where we have a very specific point of view, and that is that the more that financial advisors are transparent and clear and simple about how they do what they do and what they say, better it is for consumers and clients. So, from that perspective, we believe that fixed fee, flat fee, hourly fee compensation methods are frequently more transparent, more clear, and more simple in how they do what they do. Brian, the floor is yours.
We're really thrilled with the clients of advisors that we have on the call today. I am the founder of a website called Wealth Tender. So, wealthtender.com, we actually help people find a financial advisor. And that in my role, that's given me just a terrific opportunity to get to know so many different advisors that are helping consumers, clients in so many different ways. I'm going to start with John and Kristen, just very, very briefly. If you could just share where you are dialing in from today and how many years you've been working with your current financial advisor.
Yeah, so John and Kristen, we are in West Michigan on the shores of Lake Michigan. A lovely day here today. And we've been working with our advisor for probably a little over 2 years. Does it sound right? About that. Yeah, somewhere in there.
About 2 years. Okay, great. And then Philip?
I've been working with my advisor for 2 years, and I'm currently in the Bay Area, San Francisco area.
Thank you, Philip. And Chris?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am on the other side of Michigan in the Metro Detroit area and love the West Side as well. I have been working with my current advisor for about just 3 months.
Excellent. So, with that as background, Chris, we're going to stick with you so you can take it right back off mute. And when we spoke
Okay.
the other day, you shared that you and your husband actually did work with a traditional advisor for several years before choosing to hire an advice only advisor. So, I wanted to see if you could just take a couple of minutes to share a little bit more about your story of how your prior advisor helped you, but ultimately what you felt was missing from that relationship, and then how you decided to make that switch to an advice only advisor.
So Brian is right. We had a traditional advisor and we worked with him actually for a number of years when we didn't have any money invested with him. He really helped us as a young working couple that was just starting out to kind of tackle things like budget and student debt and even consumer debt. And so over the years, fortunately, we have grown in our successes and got to the point a few years ago where we were able to actually invest funds with that advisor. And we did that. And they had been with him for a couple of years. And one of the couple of the triggers that sort of made me start to think about, like, is this person the right support and help for us? And a very lovely person. And so it's like a breakup almost, right? So you're sort of like, don't want to break up with somebody who's so nice, but it's not actually working out. But what I was finding was a couple of things. One, I was starting to read a little bit more and trying to educate myself, and wasn't necessarily getting that kind of insight and explanation and understanding of some of the different investment vehicles or things that we should have been considering. As we had life changes, we have a daughter who's just about to turn 6, and it just, there felt like there was a gap. And then the other piece that I struggled with too, which I was sharing with Brian, is the dollars in that account had been stagnant and or at a loss for the whole entire time that they've been with this investor. And other funds in my portfolio, my 401k, what I call my COVID Robinhood account, were doing better. And so it just started making me want to research and learn more. And as I went through that process, I found just a teeny tiny bit of information about this concept and idea of advice only advisors, people that don't manage your assets and your funds for you, but will help you figure out what the right strategy is, what the right plan is for you. So I found a couple links to a couple websites, and gosh, Brian, Wealth Tender might have been one of them, but I don't know if it was, to find and seek out and search for advice only advisors. And I interviewed a few of them and selected my current advisor, and it's been a very successful process so far. So
Excellent. Well, we're going to dive a little bit more into the process in a little bit, but John and Kristen, I'm going to turn it over to you. And unlike Chris, you had not worked with a traditional advisor before hiring your current advice only advisor. But when we spoke the other day, you said it wasn't for a lack of trying. So you had been looking for an advisor, but you didn't find somebody who was a good fit. Would love to hear a little bit more if you could share about your experience in the past of trying to find that advisor, why you never pulled the trigger, and then how you discovered advice only and got started with your current advisor.
So over the years, I think as we talked, we had interviewed and spoken with a number of advisors, the typical assets under management advisors. I would say probably 3 or 4 different people we sat down over the years and spoke with, especially when we had significant life events like, 4 kids and then looking forward to putting them through college and, as I'm coming up on retirement, that sort of thing. We talked to different people and just never found anybody that could explain or their value that was in excess of what we were paying them, which would have been a pretty big number compared to what we thought we were getting out of it. As a business major, I've always done all my own investing, and Kristen's great with numbers, and so we've been pretty comfortable with doing a pretty basic approach, and had also taught Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace course at our church, so we were comfortable with finances. So we really I kind of came across in a Facebook group someone I never heard of advice only, which turned out to be exactly what we needed and what we were looking for. So do you want to add more to that?
No, you're exactly right. It wasn't because we didn't try. I couldn't make the equation work to show that there was actual value for us to stay with somebody, because we were capable of doing the mechanics of it ourselves. We just needed to see if we were missing anything.
Philip, let's transition over to you for a little bit here. So, like John and Kristen, you had never worked with a traditional financial advisor and sought out an advice only advisor from the start. And when we spoke the other day, your story is pretty interesting. So, maybe just sharing a little bit about how your net worth really grew considerably during the pandemic. And I think the audience would find that interesting, as well as the circumstances through that period that really led you down the path of seeking out an advice only advisor.
I've always been like financially literate growing up. But yeah, in the last 3 years, well, I've actually worked at Tesla for the last 7 years. So the last 3 years being at Tesla during the pandemic, my net worth had significantly went up. So it kind of got like out of my hands in terms of how to manage my finances. And that's when I started seeking somebody to just to reassure the choices I'm making was right. And if the mistakes I was making wasn't as drastic as it would be.
And then, so from there, Philip, as you were looking for that advisor, can you talk a little bit about how you went out to, really seek out that advisor and came across the advisor that you're working with today?
So I came across my advisor just listening to Choose FI podcast. I love to listen to financial content like Dave Ramsey and the Money Guy show, and Choose FI mentioned my advisor. I was interviewing multiple advisors at that time, and a lot of them were AUM structured or fee only, but the advisor I went with aligned a lot of my values. So it was a blessing in disguise that I came across him on a podcast out of everything.
Excellent. That's great. And so out of curiosity, listening to a podcast that's broadcast, presumably across the world, really, I guess, was it awkward to have that original kind of conversation, reaching out to that advisor? Did you say, hey, I first heard about you on this podcast, or was there something else in terms of that initial conversation that you really recollect when you think back to that?
So being in California and my advisor's currently in Florida, I thought there would be some kind of a lot of miscommunication, just being everything digital. But and I like to work with people like face to face. But honestly, like since I'm doing most of the mechanics, it's just nice to get on the call once a month and just having a conversation to make sure that everything is being taken care of. And I didn't have an issue, honestly, doing everything over Zoom.
That's great. And Chris, let's come back to you. It'd be interesting to hear if you could share a little bit about the process of getting started working with your advisor, and especially having that experience working with a traditional advisor previously, and what felt different about that process. And before we do that, I actually did see a question that came in asking, what is a traditional financial advisor? So just providing a little bit of background, there used to be more of the term stockbrokers, and these were more commission-based salespeople, essentially much more focused on transactions. That really evolved into what I would call traditional financial advisors that were predominantly making their revenue based on taking a percentage of the assets that they manage for their clients. So if you had $1 million portfolio, they might be charging you 1% annually, which would come out to $10,000 a year. And so with the advice only advisors, it's not doing that. They're not taking that traditional AUM, assets under management, or percentage in terms of how they're collecting revenue. They're charging a flat fee, a fixed fee, or some type of a project planning fee. So a very different model. So Chris, to come back to you, and apologies for kind of just taking a bit of a tangent there. But again, in terms of the process, so there was that traditional financial advisor that you had worked with previously. But then what was that process like getting started with the advice only advisor? How did that maybe differ from the experience with the traditional advisor? And then just any recollection of the experience, I think the audience would love to hear.
With the advice only experience, interestingly enough, there was a few barriers at the front end of the process. So it took me a little bit to figure out, how do I find a directory of advice only advisors? So I'm searching, CFPs and all these other financial distinctions that people have, that advisors have, advice only, fee only. And so you really have to be, it was harder than it should have been. I'll just say it that way. But once I found a site that I didn't have to pay for, because I did find sites, but you had to pay to get to their directories. And I wasn't quite willing to do that yet, because this was like untested waters for me. And I thought, there's got to be a way to find a directory for free, just to figure out who these people are and then be able to contact them. Then once I found that site, I went through probably 60-ish profiles on the site, read people's philosophies, visited their websites. If they had, fee information, kind of, look through that. So I culled through the list and I narrowed it down to just a handful, 3 advisors that seemingly kind of like were ticking off a lot of things on my list. I reached out to them directly, very quickly, got responses back from them to say, hey, I want to learn more, and set up kind of an interview and intake with them, right, to learn a little bit more about how they operate, their philosophy, how they work. Well, both the advisors I spoke to were advice only. They had a couple different approaches and how they thought about their work and how they structured their fees. And so I connected with both of them personally, but I landed with somebody who I felt was more aligned to like an approach and a process that worked for me and what I was trying to accomplish. So that was sort of the process that I went through, and just kind of the experience overall. I would say once I got past that initial barrier of actually just finding like a directory of where to look for fee advice only advisors that operate either on just a upfront, here's your one-time flat fee for your strategy, here's your fee for your annual checkup, whatever you want to call it, or in my case, a small upfront fee and then a monthly subscription fee that I can cancel anytime I want to. That part of it was easy. And I think advice only advisors, the benefit of that is they are going into it with a different perspective. They're not trying to sell you products. They're obviously on the front end trying to sell you a relationship with them. And I think once once that connection happens, or you feel good about like who that person is and what they can offer to you, then there isn't this constant sort of impending doom looming over you of like, okay, what types of policies, funds, annuities, what investment options are they going to try to sell me down the line? You just really didn't have that, right? It was more around, okay, let's figure out what you want, where we're at right now. Let's build a strategy. Let's build your roadmap and start ticking off your to-do list. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 3 months.
Okay, great. So during that 3 month period, so when you think about the cadence of communications and engagement, could you just maybe share a little bit about like how many times you've traded emails versus actually getting on a call, a Zoom call perhaps, or even meeting in person?
Yeah, they are not located in Michigan, so everything is virtual, Zoom calls and or emails. I would say there's an onboarding conversation, right? Just the basic sharing of information on my end, completing and sharing some forms and documents into the system to help kind of build that foundational baseline of what the current state was. And then a second conversation in person live where we sort of dialogued around all the information, the background information I shared, and I was able to answer a lot of questions they had. They left that meeting and built kind of an initial plan for us to talk through. So we had a subsequent conversation a couple of weeks later, and part of that was scheduling and timing. Part of it was me. I had homework I had to do in terms of like pulling documents and providing information. And of course, I have a full-time job and a little one at home, so that doesn't always go as fast as you want it to. But I will say my advisor is willing to meet in person whenever. They have a very easy scheduling platform where I can book a 15-minute meeting, a 30-minute check-in, a 45 minutes or longer deep dive kind of conversation with them, and they're always readily available by email. So we go back and forth on email as needed. I was executing on one of the items on my plan a week or so ago, and I got a kind of crazy message from my brokerage account that I wasn't really feeling certain about, and so I sent them a help message. Fortunately, it was nothing, but when you're new into managing your own brokerage account, that's a little bit more complex in terms of like it wasn't my Robinhood account that I was making trades on during COVID for fun. It was like my legitimate, part of my retirement plan. So anyways, very accessible, very willing to meet whenever needed. And there's no limits on it for my particular advisor. I can call her every day if I need to. I don't, but I could.
Well, it seems like it must have been a great experience because you had a big smile on your face with that entire story that you just shared with us. So thank you for that.
I love her explanation of how she got started. But she included in the beginning the scenario of the other advisors selling products and annuities. And I think that raises an issue for me in terms of getting our terms right, in terms of whether they're advice only or AUM, who are fee only, as opposed to the brokerage side, which they make their living by selling product. And I just to make the distinction that in terms of the difference between advice only and AUM, both scenarios are fee only if they're truly independent RIAs. Anyway, that was just the distinction I wanted to make.
And Philip, maybe coming back to you. So you mentioned that you're really more of a in-person person, yet you chose an advisor that you gained a sense of trust based on a podcast. And so, unlike Chris, maybe doing less due diligence of multiple advisors, feeling more quickly comfortable with just this one. Would love to hear about the process as you were getting started with this individual, your new advisor. You probably had a little bit of skepticism. I think I trust this person based on what I heard on the podcast, but I want to be sure, and I'd prefer to meet people in person, but I got comfortable, over Zoom ultimately. So could you just talk a little bit about what that was like for you? And then, like Chris did, maybe share a little bit about, let's say, the first 3 months of the relationship with your advisor.
So when I was interviewing, it was pretty much during the heart of the pandemic, and so everything was done via phone or Zoom calls to just interview and understand, who I'll be working with. And for my advisor, I knew I wanted, like I mentioned, I wanted somebody who matched my values. So my goal was to reach financial independence early and hopefully retire early. And my advisor pretty much had a game plan for that. And some advisors I did talk to who were AUM or had these like other strict strategies, like it just didn't align how I wanted to live or invest my hard work cash into. So um, even though he was in Florida, like we never met, and I knew over the phone call like everything lined up in terms of how we wanted to kind of work together, how I wanted to like diversify and like pretty much live the life that he lived. And I also see in that aspect like he's also kind of like a mentor to me, not just money, but also like family and relationships. Because I'm still single, so I don't have kids or anything like that, but would love to have kids in the future. And he just got a newborn right when we made our partnership, so it was cool to see that and grow together on that end. For the first 3 months, it was pretty. It was pretty like a lot of Zoom calls. So we had like a Zoom call maybe every other week, just kind of setting everything up, just showing him everything, my finances and what I could get working on. And our sessions were anywhere from 1 to 2 hours via Zoom. And like the first thing that really stuck out to me was like, since I'm young, I didn't think about like beneficiaries or wills or trusts. And the first thing we did was like set up a beneficiary for all of my accounts. And I never like, that was like a blind spot that I was missing. And from that point on, I knew that like it was totally worth it doing the fee only advisor where I don't have to worry about like someone selling me or just, you know, changing my assets to somewhere else, or having somebody manage it because I know I could do that. I've been managing my assets. My mom's taught me stocks ever since I was 18. So I know I could do it. It's just making sure that I have somebody in the back, holding my hand if I need it.
A terrific story again. And, John and Kristen, with you, it wasn't a podcast where you first heard about the advisor. It was Facebook. And, Facebook, there's quite a lot going on in there. And sometimes we think we can trust people. Sometimes we get fooled. So I'm sure you went into this with a little bit of a healthy skepticism when you had your first conversation with the advisor. So would love to just hear a little bit more about that. How did you kind of get over that skepticism to really realize that this individual was somebody you could trust? And then maybe also share a little bit more about that first few months working together.
Skepticism for sure. We, there's all kinds of things you can get in trouble with on the internet. We all know, but it was a conversation. The first thing was our advisor is out of state as well. It was a get to know you conversation that had two purposes. Was he good for us, and were we good for him? It was very much a two-way street conversation. I liked that he wasn't going to work with us if we weren't a good fit for his business model either. So it was definitely a very friendly, frank conversation about expectations and the plan. And I had no intention of greenlighting this process at all when we started the conversation. I thought, okay, I will do this. We've done this before. And by the end of it, I was just like, where's my checkbook? It was like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. We were anticipating retiring. I'm already retired and he's going too soon. I had, I think, 8 books generally on my nightstand from the library with all the information I could possibly need about how do we get from the accumulation phase of life to the whatever this is,
Decumulation.
the jumping off the cliff phase of
Right.
life. I was just looking for how to transition because that was my wall. I understood it intellectually, I guess, but emotionally, that was an even harder part for me. So it was important to have a relationship where there was trust, and he's very good at building trust, and I think he's earned that trust through this process. We signed on for a period of engagement of, I believe it was 3 months, and in that 3 months there were basically three set appointments, and then there was the things you needed in between as he was gathering information and doing the analysis of what we had and delivering the big reveal at the end of here's what we should be doing. I wouldn't hesitate to pick up the phone or send him an email right now. We're out of a period of engagement. It's up to us. Do we want to re-engage as we move through the next time we have questions? It's time for another look at re-engaging. That works for us. I don't know that we need an annual review or anything at this point, but that worked for us.
Okay, great. And Philip, maybe coming back to you. So since you initiated that process with your advisor, what does the ongoing cadence look like for you and your advisor? Are you reaching out to your advisor? Is he reaching out to you? A little bit of both. Could you just talk a little bit about what that engagement looks like beyond the initial plan?
Early on, it was a lot of just like I said, just getting to know each other, understanding what my goals are. But now being 2 years into this relationship, we have like a monthly talk, just understanding, where my taxes are looking like, am I on track on my goals? Is there anything like different in my investments that I should be, wary of? How does the future look in terms of the market? Is there anything I should be concerned of? Since like everything's been kind of set up, it's just mostly been check-ins. But if something does change, like if I'm doing traveling a lot, then we might budget for that. But being that was like the first year. Being the second year, I kind of been doing it myself. Since he's taught me a lot of like cool nicks and tricks on like credit card hacking and how to do all that. So yeah, I think on average, once a month, a Zoom call has been totally fine for us. And if I have an update, I'll just send him a text on what I've done just to keep in the loop.
And then, Chris, I think you're a little newer in the relationship, but maybe commenting on what you maybe anticipate that cadence might look like, if that's been discussed, or thoughts that you might have.
3 months in, I had a pretty long financial roadmap and story to kind of tackle, which we developed pretty quickly into our relationship just in that first month. And so the last couple months have been me really kind of taking care of some of those parts and pieces that I needed to take care of, account transfers, breaking up with my old advisor, those kinds of things. And so right now we have like an ongoing roadmap. And so it with my particular advisor, it's kind of go at your own pace, but I have motivation because I am paying this monthly subscription fee, albeit, very nominal and reasonable. It's still like if you're paying for your gym membership and you're not going to your gym membership, you start to feel bad about it. So I work on tackling my to-do list on a fairly regular basis and checking in. And then we have sort of that next set of conversations that we're going to have. So right now I foreshadow having probably once or twice monthly conversations with her, at least through the end of the year. And then they have an opportunity to evaluate, like, hey, do we need to continue on having these monthly conversations, or can you cancel your subscription? And then we'll just book a check-in, once annually or twice annually or quarterly, whatever makes sense for you. So that's sort of the pace we're going at right now. I have checked off a lot of really, really big to-dos. And so there's value in having kind of regular conversations with my advisor, because even simple things like I had been working with an advisor previously, and in my first month, my current advisor was able to look at my 401k allocations and contributions and right size them, minimize my fees, get me very similar type outcomes, if not better outcomes than what I was having before. So it just makes you want to kind of lift every, you know, piece of rug up and check it, because like how had that not been addressed previously? How had my first advisor not looked and said, hey, you're paying this kind of outrageous fee on this target date fund, dump all that stuff, do this instead, you'll pay a lot less in fees and you'll experience the same kind of outcome. So that's kind of what I think it's going to look like for the rest of this year, and then we'll go from there, which I is part of what I love about the advice only. It's like there for what you need it. You can step away and not continuously be paying fees for assets under management when you're not really getting anything out of it.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to tie this next one and stick with you for just a minute, Chris. So there's a question from the member of the audience asking around the distinction between advice only and AUM, so assets under management, or in other words, an advisor that's earning a fee based upon the assets that they manage for you. And you touched on your 401k or your retirement plan. And really, generally speaking, there are exceptions, but a lot of times advisors, even if they are AUM, or advice only, they're not necessarily able to access and maneuver, make the changes on behalf of their clients. So in the scenario you mentioned with your 401k, the advisor basically encouraged you to make those changes that you then implemented yourself, I assume?
Yep, that's exactly right. And really, Brian, my previous advisor had looked at my 401k as well and did a similar process, gave me advisement around how to change up my allocations, how to switch it. It's just that very basic piece of like not using target date funds that had a much higher fee attached to them was not part of that advice. But yeah, I shared that information. I provided her with whatever documents she needed in our online portal, or I have a vault, and we can share, confidential information back and forth with each other, statements, things like that, to kind of help me navigate through any of the processes that I need to navigate through myself. And for me, she knows one of my goals is sort of education. So now she's like, Chris, this is where you look on the 401k site at the fund to understand what the fee is, right? I didn't know what that was before. So yeah, she helped me through that, and then I executed on it.
Outside of your 401k, if we look back to your prior advisor that was an AUM style advisor, so they charged for the investments they managed, when you transitioned to your advice only advisor, that portfolio moved over. And I'm sure your advice only, you worked together and you came up with different allocations. But unlike your former advisor, you needed to make the changes yourself. Is that correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. So she helped me look at options for a personal investment account through providers that probably everybody is familiar with, Vanguard, Fidelity, those types of options in terms of having my own investment account that I was going to manage. And so my advisor helped me get that all set up, and kind of talk me through how to initiate the transfer from my new accounts to move what I wanted to over. And then, well, I had to write the breakup letter myself. So,
Those are always tough, but sometimes it's for the best.
yes,
Thank you so much
absolutely.
for that, Chris.
Yeah.
So, John and Kristen, with you not formally having an advisor who was implementing trades on your behalf, reallocating your investments for you, presumably you were already comfortable perhaps doing that yourself. Could you just talk about that experience of how you implemented the transactions in your portfolios historically, if I'm correct that you did that yourself, and then what that transition was like going to an advisor that helps you with the guidance, but not necessarily the implementation going forward?
Yeah, so we had our regular retirement accounts, 401ks, and then a separate brokerage account, and was comfortable choosing. We don't do really single stocks. We do mutual funds, essentially just index funds, no load, no low expense or no expense mutual funds. Had been our strategy for years and worked pretty well. What our advisor did was analyze some of those funds that I thought they were low expenses, but in reality, they turned out to be higher expenses than we thought we were paying. So he did a great job of saying, hey, you might want to look at getting out of that fund, moving those funds into this fund that would perform just as well, but have much lower fees in the end, and better tax ramifications. So we just really appreciated the fact that he customized our plan exactly to what our goals were, and that he didn't have like a template, one size fits all, cookie cutter kind of program, and really looked and spent a lot of time analyzing our program and giving us what turned out to be the best solution for us.
Great. Well, thank you. And then just briefly before we go to the reporters, Philip, with you, when you think about your transition to working with your advisor, was there a change in maybe the account, the vendor that you used, if you will, or did you feel already comfortable and your advisor felt comfortable with the platform you were already using, or any other changes that you saw as a result of their guidance?
Yeah, I was already pretty comfortable with the multiple brokerage accounts I use. E-Trade, Fidelity were the main ones that I used, and my advisor was comfortable. I think he didn't use E-Trade as much, so it kind of required me sometimes calling E-Trade and just making sure how to like find certain tasks or how to do this certain stock thing. But other than that, it was not an issue having him like see my screen, navigate through the brokerage, and just do the thing that we talked about, whether it's moving funds or etc.
Okay, and that's a great point. So, in certain circumstances, would you say when you're doing maybe a Zoom call with your advisor, you would do a screen share so you're able to go through it together, even though they're not implementing for you? Essentially, they're right there to hold your hand through the process.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And Chris, sounds like you're nodding. That's similar for you as well.
Yep,
Yeah.
indeed.
Excellent. And I see some more nods on the other side of Michigan. So,
My question for each of you is how much do you think you saved, in your first year versus an asset under management 1% fee or around there, or from your previous relationship?
I've only been with my current
Sure.
advisor 3 months, but I have already saved thousands, and will in forecasting saving many thousands more. And I have some of the advice and the steps that I've been taking are different and new than what I had been doing in the past that are going to have me much better positioned for the things that I want to accomplish in the future. Even though those goals haven't materially changed since I switched, from my previous advisor to my current, I think it's just a different approach that has helped not only save money, but is more aligned to where I need to go for the future. So,
Philip, what are your thoughts on that?
Great.
Yeah, so easily I've saved over $10,000 plus in the last couple of years. And just like I think Brian mentioned that if you have like $1 million asset under management, that's $10,000. And if you compound that over like many years, that's a lot of money. So easily over $10,000 for me. And plus my advisor, I'm not sure if the other advisors do this, but mine, he also helped me file my taxes too. So I don't even have to look into getting another CPA to complement my advisor. He kind of does both aspects of the tax planning and also managing my wealth.
Okay, great. And Kristen and John?
Yeah, I would
Okay.
say in addition, I mean, there's two numbers, right? The first, the savings in the AUM, and then also tax savings. Uh, I would estimate probably $50,000 that we have realized. And then in addition, the monies that, aside from this relatively small amount we paid them, the additional monies we've made, based on some of the moves he's had us make. I don't know if I can quantify that, but it's been exponential.
It's hard to come up with a number, but I think that's a conservative estimate, I think.
And what was the
Um,
time period you've had your engagement,
2 years.
and you think
I'd
they've
like to
saved
mention,
you
go ahead.
50K?
Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you.
50K
Sorry.
per year, I would say.
Yeah, I would
Really?
say,
Okay.
yeah, just the tax strategy alone easily it's a chunk of that.
I'd like to add something to, I guess, both what Philip said and what John and Kristen said in terms of making these comparisons between fees. And that is, I think it's important to also include what services are really provided. And now this is going to sound really overly simplex, I suppose, but I mean, I think there's a wide variety of the nature of the service provided either on the advice only side and or on the AUM side. And in fact, the Institute has been visiting a couple of the state regulators about this exact issue in terms of improving how advisors report what they are doing for the fees that they are getting. So anyway, I just wanted to interject there that I think that it's important to at least recognize that there is a wide variety of services. And so in terms of making these comparisons, I think it's fantastic. If John and Kristen can talk about $50,000, that is quite a figure. And good for you. Good for you. But anyway, I just wanted to add that point about in terms of comparing apples with apples here.
All of you seem like were already self-directed, do-it-yourself investors. Would you have felt comfortable sending your maybe adult child or aunt or parent or neighbor who was not a self-directed, fairly sophisticated investor to the advisor you're using, to that kind of advisor who is just advice only?
Our oldest son is starting with our advisor this month, so he's fairly self-directed too, but he's new in this. It worked out. It's really, really nice, especially as we think about the estate planning, to have that relationship in the family. I think is a benefit. He's our executor, so it's nice that he could have that relationship with the same advisor, and we've built enough trust with him that I think it's worked well. Our advisor is a teacher. He's a very much a teacher and knows that we want the information to do it ourselves, and he's patient and a half, and it's just worked out really well.
But to your question though, would we be comfortable with sending him to somebody that's brand new to investing or something? Probably wouldn't be a good fit. I mean, it doesn't fit his model to do that sort of thing. I mean, for someone that's brand new to investing, it doesn't work because you do have to be comfortable with executing all the things you need to do, right? So brand new, probably not, but someone who's somewhat comfortable with navigating a brokerage account, absolutely.
Philip, would you agree with that? If you think about an elder member of your family or somebody that maybe is not as familiar with investments, your thoughts?
Yeah, I can only speak on my advisor, but I have a lot of friends who are like in my age who are starting to learn how to invest or learning how to like build their financial literacy up. And for me personally, I think for my advisor, he has clients who are just like learning the basics of how to be financially responsible. So he has told me that. However, like I do agree to John's point, like it's good to understand, you know, if you have money in something, where does it go, how to use it, how does the
Mm-hmm.
user interface
Yep.
works. So that way you could have, you know, the mastermind help you navigate and make the right choices, right? But at the end of the day, like my second meeting with my advisor, he literally bought me a book and shipped it to my house via Amazon and had me read it in a month. And just to align on our goals and our strategies to make sure that we're both on the same path together. So yeah, going back to Kristen's point, super like a teacher mindset, right? Like he's holding your hand, he or she is holding your hand, and you just have to execute. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. You know, you have somebody in your background to like make sure you're doing all right.
What directory did she use to find her advice only advisor?
It was the advice only network. I think there's a real opportunity, obviously, for my peers, other consumers to learn about this idea of advice only. And for me, it was a much lower risk kind of venture to go on in terms of like, I knew even if this didn't work out, it wasn't going to cost me a ton of money and that I might learn a little bit along the way. So I think there's just an opportunity to kind of make it feel more approachable. And I think really people who are nervous about an AUM type model or a fee only type model where someone else is managing their assets, there's real value in the advice only approach. And I would consider myself a novice. I'm a growing novice, but I'm not an expert. I mentioned I thought I messed up one of my first trades in my brokerage account, but I didn't. So it's an approachable way to take control and ownership over your own financial future, and it really helps you to be invested in that, right? It helps you to get some basic financial literacy around what you should be doing to help you have a solid financial future. And I've already referred probably 10 people to my advisor, and I've only been working with her for 3 months, so it's been a real positive experience for me, and one that I would certainly encourage others to try if they whether they've worked with a traditional advisor before or not. It's been a good path for me.
Just to wrap up again with John and Kristen, and then Philip, we'll come to you if that works as well. From your perspective, Kristen and John, you know, again, thinking about somebody that's looking to hire an advisor, what would you say? And I'd be curious too. We've talked a lot about investments, but there's a lot of financial planning areas. You've mentioned taxes, but others outside of investments. So maybe just briefly chiming in beyond investments and taxes, are there some other areas that you've found have been really instrumental that you've kind of learned about, maybe that surprised you or that you expected and has really lived up to your expectations that you would be interested in sharing with people thinking about hiring an advisor today?
Yeah, I saw the question pop up about other things besides investments, and I think there was 32 areas altogether covered in our plan, and I'm just trying to remember a few of them. But in addition to estate planning, like Kristen mentioned, you know, there was everything with. We were in the process of switching our residency from Michigan to Florida, maybe back again, but choosing the right area for residency was a big one, and that whole process was a lot of help. What else can you remember? What was the help?
I didn't realize I was eligible to add $1,000 to an HSA.
Oh yeah.
And so that saved us a little bit on the tax end, and also now I have an HSA. So it was a broad view of vehicles out there that was one thing that we had missed.
Well, really appreciate it. And thank you again for your participation today. And then Philip, turning it to you again, and if you are thinking about friends, family that are thinking about hiring an advisor, and based on your experience working with an advice only advisor, anything in particular that really stands out that, as we've heard from others, they're highly recommending their own advisor, and your thoughts around how you would position this with others in your network?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you are starting to like hesitate on making financial moves, it's always good to have somebody in the background to, you know, support you or making sure you're making the right choice. But even if you don't know where to start, and if you have the means to, you know, provide, you know, pay for a service, I would say go for it. And the reason why is because they have so many clients, right, with all different kind of financial backgrounds, and they have much more of a scope versus you only have, you know, visibility of maybe your only financial situation and maybe like your parents, but you know their experience can add so much value to yours. And if you like what I did when I first, you know, found my advisors, pretty much worked backward together. Like, how do I want my life to look like the next 60 years? And we pretty much made a whole plan for that. And he provided me a lot of insights for clients who were in their 60s and 70s, like, what problems they had and what I could do, in my 20s to like get ahead of that. Whether it's taxes, whether it's investment strategies, or whether it's just life in general. So yeah, I actually got so much value, not just like the money aspect, but just like more into life. Life and money ties so closely hand in hand, right? So.
Now that's terrific, Philip. And I know we all wish that we had started doing everything as proactively as you have in your 20s. So congratulations on that. And Knut, I'll turn it back to you, but thank you again for the opportunity to moderate the panel today. This has just been tremendous.
Thank you one and all for joining. And this is from the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard. Have a good day, have a good evening, and thank you again one and all.